Welcome. I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today. I wanted to share with you a conversation that I had the other day with someone who was relating an experience to me that she had with a board that had made some decisions that were impacting her life in a way that she didn't agree with. And the anecdote gave me pause to reflect upon the concept and how it relates to business, and I think a common oversight that many of us are prone to. So as the story was being related to me, without getting into the details, essentially the board members had made some authoritative decisions that were not going to be popular by some of the stakeholders, some of the people that were affected by the decisions. And I stopped this person and said, "You know what you're describing, don't you?" And she kind of looked at me and wasn't sure what answer I was looking for. And I said, "This is very much like government. Essentially, you are describing a central authority making decisions, a few making decisions on behalf of the many." And what I said was, or what it was that gave me pause to reflect on this later, was this concept that we just don't seem to understand that that's an inherently flawed model. Now, I'm not saying it's a model we should dispel with in its entirety. It's something that's somewhat necessary. So let's reflect a little deeper on what I'm talking about here. So I went on to tell her that anytime you have a form of central planning where a few are responsible for making decisions on behalf of the many, it's flawed. You are going to end up with problems. You're going to end up with a lot of poor decisions, a lot of unintended consequences. And you may say, well, you can't please everyone all the time. And of course, that's true. However, there's a much better way to accomplish trying to please as many people as possible, even though you will never please everyone at once. So let's look at, well, what is it inherently flawed with a central planning, some sort of centralized governing body, and why it doesn't work? The issue here is that central planning authoritative bodies are ignorant. They lack sufficient intelligence, information, knowledge into all the integral parts of the system and the community or society or business that they are making decisions for. So this applies to a board of directors. It applies to any form of a board or panel. It applies to all government at any kind of level of government, and it applies to management within a business as well. So when I talk about a lack of intelligence, a lack of knowledge, a lack of information, that is the inherent problem. And what I mean by that is not that the people that are making the decisions are somehow malicious or they have malintent in their decisions. Most often, I would imagine that these people are, in fact, well-intended. In my discussion, I asked about the board, and I wanted to make some inquiries. I asked, are these board members appointed or elected? And the answer was that they are elected. And I said, do they campaign? How is it that they are chosen? If somebody's voting for them, upon what information do the voters make their decision? And yes, these board members present sort of at a maybe an annual general meeting. They present their cases for why their experience would make them a good board member. And then, they have to be nominated to begin with, and voters make the decision based on that. And I think these people, there is, some people pursue power, but most people in these positions, elected or even appointed, are maybe, I think it's most, but certainly are trying to help. They have good intentions. And so why is it so often that the outcome is not the desired outcome? And we're forever in these conversations with one another where we're venting our frustrations about the outcomes of their decision. And again, I want to tell you, I want you to take this away from this. It comes from ignorance. It comes from a lack of information. I'm using the term ignorance as meaning a lack of information, a lack of knowledge of the subject matter for which they are responsible and are making decisions. And so that is a concept that I want you to agree with and accept at its base level, that it's inherent in the system. So I'm not making any particular judgment on a particular board member, on a particular politician. Certainly, we can, judge a tree by its fruit. We can look at the decisions and behaviors of various people that we observe, and we can make our own internal judgment about their behaviors. But that's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that this is a ubiquitous concept that is universally applicable to every single governing body. And it doesn't matter how well intended. You can put the most saintly figure in government and the same result will occur. And by result, I mean unintended consequence, okay? So these are well-intentioned people, and they start to, maybe they collaborate with one another, they deliberate, debate, and they come up with decisions that'll affect the many. And these decisions, as I say, are well-intended, but they have unintended consequences due to the lack of information inherent in such a central planning model. Instead, when we talk about market economies, that's not central planned. So if we just switch the conversation briefly to economics, and you consider the opposing points of central planned economies, as in Marxism and socialism, versus market economies, as in capitalism, the difference lay in the fact that capitalism, a market economy, is all-knowing, because it's not the individuals, it's not the players, the actors, or the participants within the economy that know everything. No one can know everything. It is the system that is all-knowing. A system can be omniscient. A system can be all-knowing because what happens, the outcomes factor in everything. They say in the stock market, it's already priced in the speculation of what's going on with this particular global pandemic or that particular speculation that they say it's already priced in. What they mean is not that a central planning authority, not that some person who works for the stock exchange went out and made a decision and priced it in and changed the price. What happens is the bidding that affects prices, the supply and demand, is where the inherent knowledge lay. Okay, so that's the problem with central planning of any kind. And how this relates to your business and what you might want to consider is, well, how do I, since I have to have management, I have to make some decisions, and we have to have government of some kind, and boards are necessary. So what can we do to sort of counteract and oppose the natural inherent forces and limitations, weaknesses of such a system? The first place you got to start is to believe. I don't know what it is that we debate. We discuss these things. This is the thing that caused me pause, that caused me to reflect on this. Why are people debating these things in political discussions, economic discussions, and talking about good politicians or bad politicians, as if we don't understand that inherently they're flawed? It's a flawed model. And there are better systems and worse systems, of course, but anytime you have a centrally planned governing body, essentially planning, governing body, it is inherently flawed because of its lack of information. So what do we do? How do we oppose that? Or how do we oppose the government? Rather, how do we enable systems to occur within our own businesses, within our own lives, and the places that we can affect change to counteract the inherent flaws of a centrally planned system? The first thing you need to do is decentralize. Since we say a centralized planning system, a centralized governing body is inherently flawed because of its lack of information. So let's give some examples of what I mean about that. So somebody who is in government, whether you're talking about a prime minister, a president, or a governor, or a mayor, this person may care a great deal for the constituents in whatever particular geographical region that this person is overseeing and serving. And yet, how can that person possibly know what each person wants? And you might say, well, through democracy, through some plebiscite, or through surveys of some kind, through the election and feedback that people give. But that's only one possible form of intelligence, and it's often very, very inherently flawed. People may not know what they want until they experience it. And what we don't realize is when we say we want one thing, have we given full consideration to what the unintended consequences, what the ripple effect of enabling that particular condition will bring about? And the answer is no, it's impossible. You can't consider all things. So instead, leave it up to a system to generate its own intelligence. And so the concept of supply and demand within a system does that automatically. So we take that same example, and instead of somebody trying to make a decision on behalf of all the people it's going to affect, let the people who are affected by it vote with their dollars and their feet and their behavior. They naturally will do things, and you just observe what's happening. And through the observation and letting it organically happen, you can react. And that's what happens in business. So if you overprice your product, for example, people won't buy it. They don't see the value in it. And you can observe and you can assume people don't see enough value. That's why this is not being purchased. So you can adjust your pricing accordingly. You don't need to know why. You don't need to understand what it is that made them not purchase it. In the end, you just know that the price contains the intelligence. And so we talked about, well, what can we do? We can decentralize. We can involve more people by letting customers and constituents and those stakeholders who are affected by decisions naturally act and interact with one another and make observations. An important thing to understand is the size of the community affected. The number of stakeholders, the sheer number affects the effectiveness of a centrally planned authority. You might say within a small family, the parents as the central authority can be very effective. There has to be a place where the buck stops. And within the context of a family in a small community like that, it's very, very effective. And yet, even within a small community like the family, you can see the logic to getting some feedback from the family members. Now, of course, the younger the children, let's say, for example, in the family, the less credence you can put into the logic behind their decision. Maybe a very young child is completely incapable of making a decision that has a major consequence in terms of the health of the family and that kind of thing. But rather, he can still weigh in on what he likes and dislikes, and that can add to the intelligence of the information, the knowledge of the parents, and they can factor that into their decision. Now, if you expand into a larger community beyond a family, and you say an extended family, and then you might say, okay, well, the elders or the parents and grandparents are going to get together in planning this particular family vacation, and they're going to try to apply the intelligence they have, the knowledge they have of the extended family. But you see what we're doing here? We're decentralizing the authority. We're trying to expand the authority to include intelligence that spans beyond what the initial person may have. And then you can implement mechanisms by, we said before, like surveys, asking for feedback and that kind of thing. But the broader the expansion of these communities, the more stakeholders it is, the more inherently flawed it is, because there's more and more information missing. There's greater chance for unintended consequences. There's greater chance that you overlooked something. In fact, the chances are 100% that you're not going to take into consideration everyone's true feelings, because we just don't have a mechanism to know that. And the broader, the larger, the more expansive these communities are, the greater number of stakeholders, the more inherently flawed it becomes. That's why this is so critical when we talk about government and having entire nations, or God forbid, a global government that governs all of us. The larger the community, the more inherently flawed a central planned system becomes. And so, number one, we want to use the law of economics to allow things to occur organically. So the way to counteract on a larger scale, and this goes, the analogy holds true, the comparison will hold true for businesses of varying sizes. If you're a one-man operation, you can probably rely more heavily on your own central plan decisions. The bigger your organization, the more you need to get feedback and try to gather intellect from multiple sources. It should also be noted that the more trustworthy the authority and the more trust that exists within the system or within the community, the more reliably that authority can count on the information fed back to them. When you have great distrust, if you don't trust the government, you're not going to give the government your honest opinion. And we're becoming increasingly affected by a culture of distrust. And I've heard that I think it's Sweden has a culture where they have a great deal of trust in their government. So they may get away with some more social programs, and the system works maybe a little bit more effectively than it might in a country that has complete distrust of its government. And so trust inherent within the community and within the stakeholders, that culture of trust will greatly affect the effectiveness of getting feedback from the stakeholders. Apply that in the context of your business. Do you have a culture of trust with your other stakeholders? And I just gave an example of a single man operation. And I said, well, maybe you can rely more heavily on the intelligence you have for making decisions within your operation, but still you want to decentralize and get more intelligence from more stakeholders, because even if you're a one-man operation, so to speak, you are the boss and there's no employees, you still have other stakeholders, your vendors, your suppliers, your customers, of course, and the community at large. So any way you can get feedback from them is invaluable to decentralizing and increasing the intelligence with which you can make the base of information with which you can make your decisions. So imagine if you paid attention to the reviews of your product or service, and you surveyed your vendors and your suppliers, and you applied that information to more to refine your system and to improve your system in such a way that all stakeholders benefit. So that's an example of decentralizing. And if you have an organization with a few hundred employees or thousands of employees, have you created mechanisms through which feedback can continually be given? That not only is it expected, but the culture is such that as soon as someone has an idea for improvement or constructive criticism or a complaint, it's just automatically communicated very openly and then that mechanism feeds back through people and through a system that can affect change, that can plan for strategies to make improvements that involve as many people as possible, especially the front lines who are most impacted by it. The opposite would be that, through the rumor mill or through gossip, the boss hears of a complaint, and the first thing he does is he gets defensive. And then if he says, okay, well, I better do something about this because there may be some authenticity to the gossip, there may be some validity to the complaint. So he solely comes up with a strategy for improvement, and then he, quote unquote, imposes that upon and implements it within the organization, and everybody's stuck with it. And what happens in those cases is the organization is going, why didn't anyone consult me for my feedback or how we would have done it? That's not at all how we would solve the problems. That guy doesn't even know. He never comes down to the line, or he doesn't work the front counter. He doesn't handle the incoming customer complaints, support tickets, and so on. How would he know? He didn't even ask for any feedback. So sort of compare and contrast the ideal situation from the less ideal. The ideal is you would know everything. You would be omniscient. You would be able to apply all intelligence for how people feel, even if they don't know how they feel or how they would react in a certain situation. You would know that. And since that's impossible, you're trying to work toward that. And and contrasting that is you only are left with your intelligence, your knowledge, and regardless of how expansive that might be based on years of experience with the organization or whatever, it still pales in comparison to adding just a few more stakeholders into the mix, into planning that. And so once again, the way in the context of business especially, to counteract the inherent flaws of central planning and a central authority is to decentralize. And the second one would be to try not to intervene as much. Try to let the problems work themselves out through a system you put in place that incorporates culture and empowerment. A big part of it is, the trust that you can now empower your people to enable that they can expend company resources. They can expend resources on creating solutions to the problem. People feel very responsible when that's the case. When they're empowered to make these decisions, they want to make good decisions. And then be nimble, be ready to pivot when things are not working out, and have that same mechanism, that same distributed network of stakeholders and players, participants within the system who enabled the first level of improvement, refinement 1.0, they now go on and say, okay, well, we had this unintended consequence, but because of the culture of trust and communication, we're getting feedback, we're responding to it immediately, and we continually refine, perpetually refine. Okay, so first of all, we need to decentralize, we need to step out of the way and stop intervening, stop imposing the will of the central authority, empower the masses, the front lines, those who are most impacted by those decisions that we're making changes on. So what this looks like in practicality, certainly in a business, but also in governments and any type of authoritative panel of decision makers, is try not to make laws and policies. Instead, discuss opportunities for improvement and enable the players the freedom to act in a way that will likely solve the problem. The thing is, just the lack of intervention is stepping back and letting people solve the problems. Empowering them is about freeing them. It's about giving them freedom. So government should do almost nothing aside from protecting individual liberty, freedoms, and rights, And also within any organization, you want to try to uphold that freedom and let the actors, the stakeholders, make decisions that are in their own best interest. By each individual acting in his own best interest, what tends to happen is that the whole system works best for everyone. Now, of course, there's always bad actors in every system. That's why we talked about earlier that the smaller the community, the more you can rely on central planning, because you don't have to worry as much about a bad actor. But as the system expands and you have the potential for bad actors, it's sort of counteracted by all the things that are going well for everyone else in the system. And those bad actors can be brought forward. And so that's where we talk about protecting individual liberties and rights within any organization, whether it's a nation or the context of a business. What you can do as part of the protection, your policy or your law can have to do with allowing people the freedom to do things insofar as it doesn't harm somebody else or remove freedoms and liberties from that other person. So whatever you would identify as a bad actor, whatever you would identify as an infraction that is harmful and imposes physical force or coercion or harm of any way or threat in any way of somebody else within the system, that's where the policies can exist and should exist to protect everyone. But don't plan and create policies with the best of intentions, trying to get good outcomes and egalitarian, equal outcomes for everyone. It doesn't work. It never has worked. It never will work. We need to stop debating this, and we need to just right away accept we need to allow systems to work for themselves. We need to allow people to act in their own best interests insofar as they are not harming one another, and let the systems organically solve problems. In economics, Frederic Bastiat, if you'll forgive my French, Frederic Bastiat, I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it. He described a phenomenon that is the seen and the unseen. And it has to do with the cost of opportunity. And it really relates to what we were talking about today, because he gives the example of the broken window. Somebody might argue economically that if I had somebody break a window on someone's private property, that would create economic opportunities, because there would have to be a contractor who has to come out and maybe clean up and replace the window, and there would have to be a manufacturer of glass involved, and there'd be this whole velocity of money where there's this exchange. But what that fails to address is the unseen. Everything I just described in terms of economic impact that sound good, where money is exchanged and there's a ripple effect that expands throughout the economy by replacing the window. What that fails to take into consideration is the unseen. What would happen with the money if it wasn't spent on the window contractor, on the glass, on the cleanup, and whatever else is involved? You see, in an economic model, the money does get used in some way. And so if you take it from one thing and use it on another, you are not seeing the impact of what that money may have benefited many people. That has to do with this lack of knowledge, this lack of intelligence, this ignorance that I'm talking about. And if you understand and accept the premise that I can't possibly know everything, there is a huge, vast, unseen economic and otherwise impact out there, then you can accept that we should just let things happen by people acting in their best interest. And so I would encourage you, let's bring it all back as we wrap up into the context of your business. Stop implementing policy all the times. Maybe go back and try to remove a bunch of rules. No matter how well intended they were, you have to ask yourself, is everybody content with them? And probably not. And don't just dismiss it by going, well, you can't please all of the people all of the time. I get that. But instead, could you do a better job in your own self-interest? I'm not asking you to go out and be benevolent and try to be so charitable to all of your people and all of the stakeholders. What I'm asking you to do is to accept the inherent flaws in a centrally planned decision-making system and say, what's in my best interest? In my best interest is to get the best decisions possible made for my business. And in order to do that, I need to decentralize. I need to stop intervening as much. I need to create a culture of trust and empower my people and implement a culture and systems, mechanisms through which we all collaborate in our own best interest, and we align objectives to get the best. That everybody's looking for the best for themselves. And if you align your objectives and you decentralize and you get feedback and intelligence from more and more sources, you will create better, you'll create a better business. You will create better policies when it is necessary. So focus your policies, your rules, your laws strictly around those things which protect the individual actors within your system, the employees, that protect the individual rights and align objectives. These things will create a better environment, and then, see what happens. It's still your business. You can always revert back. What have you got to lose? Give it a try. I'm interested in what you think. Have you had conversations about how government and other central planning authorities are making decisions that frustrate you? And have you given consideration to what is a better way, and how does this apply in your life, in the context of your business? Put in something in the comments, debate me. What have I missed completely? Where am I off base here, or where do you agree? I'm always interested in us learning from one another. So thanks for joining me today, Perpetually Refined.